My stepmother pushed her son into my father's spotlight. She called him the real heir, said I was just a tech guy. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just walked away and waited. 3 years later, her golden boy couldn't run the empire without me, and everything she built started to crumble. My dad wasn't the warm, hugging type. He was the type of man who shook your hand on your birthday and made you feel like you earned it. Still, I always looked up to him. He built his company, Stratwell Systems, from nothing. Worked through the 90s tech boom, crashed hard in the dot-com bust, and rebuilt from the ground up. Everyone called him a visionary. I just called him Dad. He remarried when I was 17. I wasn't bitter about it. My mom had passed 4 years earlier, and I figured he deserved someone. And to be honest, Meredith seemed fine at first. Polished, calm, smart. A little cold maybe, but that wasn't unusual in our circle. She had a son, Brandon, a couple years younger than me, but he didn't live with us at first. He stayed with his dad across the country until he turned 18. When Brandon moved in, something shifted. My dad, reserved, precise, started beaming like a proud little league parent every time Brandon walked into the room. The kid wasn't a genius or anything. He was loud, confident, knew how to talk a big game. Slick, like a salesman who practiced in the mirror. But suddenly, Dad couldn't stop praising him. Natural leadership. Big ideas. Reminds me of myself at that age. Meanwhile, I'd been working at Stratwell full-time since college. I started in DevOps, then rotated through business development, then operations. I wanted to know the business end to end, earn my place. I never expected handouts. But one night, everything came into focus. It was a dinner at the house, formal, catered. A few board members, some investors, a couple close family friends. Meredith was glowing, draped in something way too sparkly for a Tuesday. Dad was at the head of the table. I remember the way his voice rang out, calm but proud. I want to make an announcement, he said, lifting his glass. Effective next quarter, Brandon will be stepping into a new strategic role at Stratwell. We've been talking succession planning, and it's time to think long-term. I froze, smile still fixed on my face. Brandon beamed. Meredith actually teared up. The room applauded. My chest was burning, but I didn't say anything. I waited until later, when the guests were gone and I could get my dad alone. Succession planning? I asked, trying not to sound bitter. Since when does Brandon have a background in anything but brand slogans and Instagram quotes? Dad didn't get mad. He just looked, resolved. He has vision, he said. He understands where markets are going. He speaks people's language. I've been watching him work the rooms. He's a natural. Have you been watching me? For the last 5 years? Or did I imagine all the weekends, the late nights? It's not about that, Mason. You're brilliant, no one doubts that. But leadership, it's not just knowledge. It's presence, energy. Brandon's got it. It felt like a punch I didn't see coming. I tried to tell myself it was just a PR move. Maybe Dad wanted someone flashy for investors, and Brandon was the face, while I kept the wheels turning. But no, things escalated fast. Brandon was promoted to VP of Strategic Development, whatever that meant. Suddenly, every press release had his name in it. He was doing interviews, giving TED-style talks, shaking hands with people whose names I'd spent years trying to get on our calendar. Worse, Meredith started calling him the real heir in front of people. Family friends. At a gala, I overheard her say, "Mason's a brilliant technician, but Brandon, he's built for legacy." I felt invisible in my own life. One morning, I got called into a board meeting without an agenda. They told me they were realigning responsibilities, and I was being reassigned to a research advisory role. Basically, a fancy way of saying, get out of the way. I wasn't even 30 yet, and I'd just been exiled from the company I thought I was being groomed to lead. Brandon took over my office. I found my stuff in a box outside HR. When I confronted Dad about it, he didn't even look sorry. "I need someone who can play the game," he said quietly. "You're not that guy." That was the last real conversation I had with him. A month later, Meredith and Brandon hosted a flashy rebranding event for Stratwell. I didn't get an invite. I watched it online. Brandon gave a speech about reshaping legacy, while my dad stood beside him, clapping. I felt like a ghost. No one reached out. No one asked where I'd gone. It was like I'd never been there. And still, I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I disappeared. Or at least, that's what I let them think. After everything crashed, I did what everyone expected me to do. I disappeared. I moved out of the city, canceled my work phone, stopped answering emails. There were no grand farewells or dramatic speeches. I just faded. Meredith and Brandon probably thought I couldn't handle the heat. Maybe they imagined I was sulking somewhere in a dark apartment, nursing a bottle and Googling how to move on. Let them think that. I rented a small, quiet place in Marin, nothing special. One bedroom, a view of the hills, enough space to breathe. I spent the first few months hiking alone in the mornings, then reading through old journals of Dad's at night. I still had access to them. He kept everything in cloud folders, shared with me years ago. I doubt he even remembered. He'd built Stratwell off the back of data architecture no one else understood at the time. The tech had changed since, sure, but the core systems were still his original skeleton. He used to say, "The one who understands the bones of a company owns it, whether the world knows it or not." I thought about that a lot. I didn't reach out to him, or to anyone at Stratwell. I unfollowed all the company's socials, ignored the news. When they issued a press release about the new age of Stratwell leadership, I didn't even click the link. But I saved the headline, just for me. I ran into an old coworker at a coffee shop once. She did that thing where her voice goes a little too high. "Mason? Oh my God, how are you?" I just smiled. "Good. Real good. Been working on myself." She blinked like she didn't know what to say. Then she nodded. "Yeah, I heard things got messy. But hey, new beginnings, right?" I told her I was consulting. Some low-key projects, nothing fancy. She wished me well and left, probably texting someone about how far I'd fallen. I didn't care. In public, I looked relaxed. Casual. I grew out a beard, wore hoodies instead of sport coats. No one recognized me in the city anymore. I liked it that way. Behind the scenes, I was busy. I spent hours pulling public filings, digging into company reports. Not just Stratwell, but every little side entity they were now propping up around it. Meredith and Brandon were building something flashier, more consumer-facing. Tech-adjacent lifestyle brands. Wellness apps. A ridiculous blockchain play called StratChain. The usual buzzword garbage. They were loud about it. Constant press releases, photo shoots, magazine features. Brandon in sunglasses at launch parties. Meredith in tailored suits giving talks on future-proofing legacy wealth. But here's the thing. Noise doesn't mean value. And hype doesn't mean control. The original patents? Still under Stratwell's parent shell, buried under years of legal layering. I knew the architecture better than anyone. I knew what was vulnerable. And I knew exactly where the dependency points were. I'd built half of them. Still, I said nothing. When people asked how I was doing, I told them I was fine. Figuring things out. Doing some soul searching. Sometimes I'd smile and say, the quiet life isn't so bad. I even sent Brandon a congratulatory email after he got profiled in Techlum. "Hey Brandon, saw the piece, impressive stuff. Hope things are going well. Let me know if I can ever be of help." He didn't respond. Not even a thanks. Perfect. Dad never reached out either. That stung more than I expected. A few times I hovered over his name in my contacts, thumb ready to hit call. But what would I say? "Hey, remember me? The son you pushed aside for a kid who memorizes jargon and dresses like Steve Jobs on Halloween?" No, I kept my silence. One day, I went back to the old Stratwell HQ. Not to go inside. I just stood across the street, sipping coffee, watching the building like it was an old friend that forgot my name. Brandon's name was now on the glass entrance. Brandon Walsh, President, Stratwell Group. My last name was gone. That night, I opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving since college graduation. I poured one glass, sat in the dark, and toasted the version of me that thought hard work was enough. "Rest easy, man," I said to the air. "You were good. You were just in the wrong house." The next morning, I got up and went back to work. Not on resumes. Not on healing or therapy or any of that. I went back to the bones. About a year after my exile, I started noticing little tremors around Stratwell. Small things, easily dismissed, but out of rhythm. First was the analyst call. I listened in anonymously, like I always did. Brandon led it, full of buzzwords, empty promises. But then one of the investors asked a pointed question about the company's IP structure, specifically, a licensing pathway that had been flagged in a recent audit. Brandon froze, mumbled something about legacy agreements and our legal teams on it. Except I knew they weren't. Because I was the legal team who built those agreements. I was the one who wrote the clause that split control across multiple trusts, Back when Dad thought decentralization was a safety net, Brandon had inherited the face of the company. But the foundation? He was guessing. That's when I started watching more closely. A few weeks later, one of Stratwell's app rollouts crashed at launch. A wellness tracker they'd hyped for months. Users flooded the reviews with complaints, bugs, errors, data loss. A few influencers even posted videos mocking it. Stratwell blamed a third-party contractor, the usual scapegoat. But I recognized the stack. It was a system I'd cautioned against years earlier. They'd ignored it. I didn't say a word. Just saved the screenshots. Meanwhile, Brandon started giving clumsy answers in interviews. Things that didn't add up. I watched one clip where he claimed Stratwell's patented encryption was fully AI integrated, which doesn't even mean anything. Commenters noticed. One tech blog ran a sarcastic piece titled, "Brandon Walsh invents new level of buzzword soup." I read it with coffee, smiled a little. Meredith, for her part, was busy too, expanding her influence. She'd started a leadership podcast, launched a mentorship program, even wrote a book. Built from Grace, How to Lead When Legacy is Watching. I bought a copy, read it in one night. It was mostly fluff, but what caught my attention was a chapter on navigating family dynamics and succession planning. She didn't use my name, but the meaning was clear. Sometimes, a child grows up in the glow of expectation, but lacks the temperament to lead. Vision, not birthright, determines the future. I highlighted that line, filed it away. One day, an old colleague from the Stratwell ops team reached out, Lisa. We hadn't talked in almost a year. She messaged me out of the blue. Hey, random question. Did you ever set up backups for the legacy licensing server? Things are weird over here. I almost laughed. I wrote back casually. Don't remember. Could have been archived. You'd have to check the vault logs. She didn't reply after that. Probably wasn't supposed to talk to me in the first place. 2 weeks later, Stratwell's quarterly licensing revenue took a hit. A quiet one, barely a footnote in their report, but I noticed. And then came the strangest thing yet. Brandon called me. It was a Saturday afternoon. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, and when I picked up, I heard his voice, overly casual, forced. Hey, Mason. Hope you're doing well. I was wondering if we could catch up sometime. Grab a coffee, maybe? I stayed silent for a second. That's new. He chuckled, awkward. Yeah, well, I figured, it's been a minute. No hard feelings, right? I didn't answer that. Just said, busy week. Maybe next month. He agreed too quickly. Yeah, whenever works. Let's stay in touch. He never followed up, but it told me one thing. He felt something slipping, and he didn't know what. From the outside, they still looked untouchable. Meredith was on magazine covers. Brandon was on panels. Stratwell was posting glossy promo videos weekly. But from the inside, I could feel it coming apart. There were murmurs now, Reddit threads, private Discord groups of former employees sharing horror stories. A few minor lawsuits had popped up around IP usage. Nothing fatal, but enough to make investors sweat. I started getting emails again from former colleagues, industry friends, even a couple board members. All vague and polite. Heard you've been keeping a low profile. Would love to hear your take on the current direction. Random thought. Do you remember the audit process you used for code compliance back in 22? I replied to none of them. I just watched. The house they'd built was shiny, sure. But under the surface? Cracks. And I was the only one who knew exactly where they were. By year 3, the shine started to peel off. It didn't happen all at once. There was no scandalous headline, no viral takedown video. It was slower, quieter. The kind of collapse that starts as a wobble and turns into a landslide, if you know where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. The first big crack came from inside, a whistleblower. I wasn't the one who tipped anyone off. I didn't need to. Stratwell's new blockchain division, StratChain, had been playing fast and loose with their usage of proprietary code they didn't fully own. Brandon had greenlit some efficiency measures that bypassed legacy license agreements, assuming no one would catch on. But someone did. A mid-level dev flagged it. Quietly, legally, the way corporate fires start. Suddenly, Stratwell found itself under a quiet, but very real intellectual property review. Internal investigation. NDA audits. Legal fees started stacking up. They kept it quiet, buried in quarterly footnotes. But the board noticed. That's when the leadership shuffle rumors started. Meredith, for her part, tried to keep the image steady. She booked more speaking gigs, even flew to Switzerland for a Women in Tech summit. But during a live Q&A, a financial reporter brought up Stratwell's growing legal expenditures and asked about questions of leadership maturity. Meredith laughed it off, too hard. You could see her composure crack for just a second. Someone clipped it, and it started floating around LinkedIn. Not viral, but enough for people in the industry to start whispering. The next hit was financial. The licensing revenue, which had always been Stratwell's dependable backbone, was suddenly dropping, month by month. Analysts couldn't explain it. Brandon went on record blaming market shifts and strategic pivoting toward experiential revenue models. Translation? They didn't know what the hell was going on. I did. And so did a few private investors who began quietly pulling their support. A private equity group that once planned to partner with Stratwell backed out last minute. Another firm announced plans to build their own competing infrastructure instead of licensing from Stratwell. The shift was subtle, but it was clear. The confidence was bleeding. Brandon started disappearing from the spotlight. No more panels. No more podcasts. His social media went silent. The polished, all-smiles golden boy they'd turned into a brand was suddenly nowhere to be seen. I heard through someone, Lisa again, that there'd been shouting matches behind closed doors. That dad had flown back from a retreat early to deal with structural inconsistencies. Meredith, reportedly, had been trying to reassert long-term vision to the board, whatever that meant. And then the board voted. It didn't make headlines. It was just a line buried in a dense business press article. Stratwell announces transitional leadership model to address evolving market needs. Brandon was out. Meredith? Stepping back to focus on mentorship and philanthropic ventures. Both of them publicly spun it as strategic growth. New chapter, evolving visions, blah, blah, blah. But people in the industry knew. You could hear it in the tone of the analysts, see it in the faces of former allies. Their empire hadn't exploded, it had eroded. And the best part? I never lifted a finger. Not in the way people would expect. No threats. No lawsuits. No exposés. Just gravity, pulling down what was already top-heavy. Brandon tried to salvage things. He launched a short-lived startup, something involving AI-powered coaching or whatever tech bros are calling leadership these days. It fizzled out in 6 months. Last I heard, he was pitching investor decks out of a co-working space downtown, still wearing the same black turtlenecks, still trying to be someone's idea of a genius. Meredith faded too. Her podcast stopped updating. Her book, once hyped for a second edition, quietly disappeared from shelves. Their names stopped showing up in industry newsletters. Their invites to exclusive events dried up. They weren't disgraced, just irrelevant. And I kept quiet. I went on the same walks, wore the same hoodies, ordered the same coffee. No interviews, no speeches. I let the silence do the talking. Every now and then, I'd get an email from someone at Stratwell, someone asking if I'd consider consulting or returning in an advisory role. I didn't reply. I wanted them to sweat, to wonder, to look over their shoulders at the infrastructure they no longer understood. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about clarity, and clarity has a way of making people nervous. Brandon disappeared from public life just before the end of that fiscal year. No farewell post. No open letter. One day he was hosting live streams about visionary leadership, and the next he was just gone. Meredith lasted a few months longer. Tried to salvage the image. Did some charity panels. Recycled old quotes about legacy and resilience. But even she must have felt it. The way the rooms got colder. The way people smiled tighter. The way her calls stopped getting returned. The brand didn't collapse. Stratwell still exists, just smaller, quieter, safer. The board stepped in, restructured operations, spun off the vanity projects, and buried the last few press releases with words like streamlining and pivot. By the time the dust settled, nobody even remembered who started StratChain, or who Brandon Walsh was. I was never mentioned in any of it. Not once. And that's exactly how I wanted it. It's funny. People think revenge is loud, explosive. Some dramatic confrontation in a boardroom, a slap across the face, a viral confession video. That's the kind of revenge people imagine. But real revenge, the kind that works, is quiet. It moves like fog, creeps in unnoticed. And when the sun rises, nothing looks the same, but no one can say when the change happened. That was the kind I had in mind. And maybe they suspected. Toward the end, Meredith must have known something wasn't right. Brandon definitely did. I heard from someone at Stratwell, Lisa, again, that he kept bringing up the old systems I used to run, asking questions no one could answer, getting agitated in meetings. What happens if the old access protocols fail? Who controls the legacy keys? Why aren't we getting renewal triggers from the core stack? Blank stares, shuffled papers, excuses. At one point, he reportedly said, "We need to find Mason." That made me laugh. By then, he was already too late. The irony is they had everything. Public approval, media coverage, corporate power. They had my father, my last name, my seat at the table. But there was one thing they never had. Understanding. They didn't understand the systems, the infrastructure, the hidden mechanisms that made Stratwell more than just a name on a glass door. They never bothered to learn the bones of it. And the bones, those were mine. They thought I left because I lost, because I was weak, bitter, beaten. But the moment I walked out that door, the outcome was already sealed. Because what Brandon and Meredith never realized was this. I was the continuity trust. Years ago, before Dad got distracted with Meredith's big visions, we drafted a failsafe. A quiet clause in the legal shell of Stratwell's licensing infrastructure, tucked deep inside the documentation. In the event of significant misalignment with original operating intent, full discretion over digital asset access reverts to the technical continuity trustee. Guess who Dad named? Me. He probably forgot about it. Or maybe he never imagined it would come to matter. But I never forgot. So when they started building their empire on top of my foundation, thinking I'd walked away for good, I let them. I let them build high, loud, fast. And then I turned off the lights. Not all at once. Not enough to crash anything. That would have been too obvious. Just enough. Enough to trigger confusion, licensing issues, back-end flags. Enough to make stakeholders nervous. Enough to introduce friction, doubt. And in business, doubt is death. They didn't burn. They just faded. And me? I stayed in the background. I never reached out. Never gloated. Never made a scene. I just waited. Until last week. I got a letter, real paper, handwritten. It was from Brandon. I don't know how you did it. But I know you did. It's over. And somehow, I think you planned this from the beginning. I folded the letter, set it aside, sipped my coffee, and smiled. Because he finally understood what Meredith never did. The heir isn't the one who stands in the spotlight. It's the one holding the power switch.